All right, so hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, since we have audience from different continents. Welcome to our TMS Talk Season 2. Today's event is going to be hosted by me and Dr. Chen. I'm Chen, a postdoc working in Leibniz Institute for New Materials in Germany. And Bihe, could you introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I am currently working as a management consultant in London. Before then, I did my PhD in molecular microbiology in the University of Cambridge in the UK.
All right, thank you, Bihe. So today we are very pleased to have Dr. Steven Cranford joining our society to give the special talk. Dr. Cranford is currently the editor-in-chief of Matter, a relatively young journal from Cell Press, focusing on the cutting-edge research of material science and the related interdisciplinary fields. Dr. Cranford got his bachelor degree in civil engineering from Memorial University, Canada, and his master's degree in structural engineering from Stanford. Then he went to MIT and joined Professor Marcus Buehler's lab, right? Completing his PhD in 2012 within the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and also affiliated with the Center of Material Science and Engineering. Before accepting a new role as editor-in-chief for Matter, Dr. Cranford was faculty at the Northeastern University's College of Engineering. So welcome, Dr. Steven Cranford.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right.
So before we start in terms of logistics, so we're going to run the talk today as an interview style discussion. We've kind of summarized a couple of questions, which we think everyone will be very keen to ask Steve. And then at the end of the session, we'll also open the floor to the audiences for, your individual questions. And in the meantime, please make sure you mute yourself. And at the end, raise your hand if you wanted to ask a question in person, or you can type it in the chat box for us to relay the question to Steve. And then I know you are all keen, but please ask no more than 2 questions and then give time to other people.
Yeah.
Cool, shall we start?
Yeah.
Yeah, so welcome, Steve. We're very honored to have you. And I thought it'd be nice to start with, getting to know a bit more about you as a person, especially, in your past life before working as a scientific editor. What did you do before then?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, like I think a lot of people here, my career was very much academic driven. So, I mean, my undergraduate at Memorial, I was down the structural engineering path. So I did structural engineering undergraduate, civil engineering. And then I went to Stanford, and I still envisioned myself going down that route, traditional buildings and bridges. So Stanford was very much seismic design, stuff like that. I did a lot of mechanics and finite element analysis. But at Stanford, I guess, I mean, you're exposed to a lot more academics, high-end research type stuff like that. So that's kind of when I made the decision that I was going to do at least a PhD and see where it take me. So yeah, so I finished at Stanford. I could have stayed there, but I wanted to go back closer to the East Coast, because I was from the East Coast of Canada. So basically, I applied to a bunch of universities more on the East Coast, Columbia, Cornell, and then MIT. And I met with my future advisor, Marcus Buehler. And when I met with him, he's like, "Well, what do you do?" And it's like, I like steel and concrete. And Marcus, if you ever seen his stuff, he's like, "I do spider silk and collagen and proteins and this music connection and all this crazy stuff." And I was like, that sounds awesome to do research in. If I had known then what I was getting myself into, I probably made another choice. But I mean, it sounded exciting at the time. So I started working with him and basically did computational material science. So full atomistic simulation and MD. So completely different than concrete and steel. But basically, that's where I became an expert in it. And I really like the approach. My structural background, I kind of said from the right perspective, everything starts to look like a beam. And so even though it's at the atomistic scale, molecular scale, you can still do a lot of structural engineering. So I really kind of exploited that perspective and was very fortunate to publish quite a bit in my PhD. So I think I had 15 to 20 papers, a Nature publication. We co-wrote a text, Biomateriomics, which had nothing to do with my dissertation work. So it was kind of like a side project that we wrote a text. So it was very interesting, but I delved into the details of the mechanics of everything. So, you know, I wanted to bring that more to structural engineering. So I still like teaching bridges and buildings. So, you know, you apply for academic positions. And so my vision was kind of bringing these new materials, you know, molecular simulation to structural engineering. So that's why they kind of like that pitch, you know, your elevator talk at Northeastern University. It was still in the Boston area. So I interviewed at a few other places. You know how it works. You apply for 20, you get 5 interviews or something. I was pretty fortunate. Anyways, I ended up accepting the offer at Northeastern. So it started myself there. So I was at Northeastern for 6 years, basically up until I went up for tenure. And I seen it coming a bit of a mile away. And so, I mean, I was looking for out of Northeastern because ultimately I was not awarded tenure. There's multiple reasons for that I won't get into. But one of the things the audience I'm talking to, I guess moving on to the next slide. Who's controlling the slides? Yeah, so there's just a few slides here. So, I mean, if you're going into academia and you're going to be a professor, an academic, there's a few ways you can look at yourself to kind of establish. So I wouldn't call this necessarily advice. And this wasn't clear to me when I started, so it's kind of in retrospect. But if you just go into the next slide, basically there's 2 types of academics. So, you know, you could be a field guy or a tools guy. So if you're a field guy, you're very much kind of like, you know, I'm going to do renewable energy. I'm going to do solar energy. I'm going to do cancer research, right? So you're going into a field and all your expertise is into there. The tools guy is like, what do you do? And you're like, I'm a mechanics person, right? You say, I do computer simulation. You know, you apply that to different fields, but you become an expert in the tools guy. And obviously there's overlap in these, so it all depends what you consider yourself. So then you have your field guy or tools guy. So the next slide. I also found that the 2 kind of professors, you're either the problem solving type or you're the visionary, right? So the problem solving type is kind of, you look for the next challenge in whatever field or whatever you're doing. So you're developing tools, or you're trying to make a solar cell more efficient, or you're trying to, you know, tackle how to handle a tumor or something like that. Where the visionary guys are more like long-term effects, you know, 10 years down the line, I'm going to invent the next type of more efficient solar cell. I'm going to invent, you know, quantum computers or something like that. And what you're working towards doesn't even exist yet. So, you know, and there's overlap. So if you just wanted to go to the next slide, obviously just, you know, there's tons of overlap. So this categorization, the top guys in the field are a little bit of everything, right? And that's why they're the top guys in the field. But most, you can kind of, your strengths typically go to one of these circles. So just next slide. There you go. So I was definitely a tools guy and I was a problem solver. So I would bounce from kind of material system to material system and see where the challenge was that interests me, and kind of do some research and write a paper. And then once I wrote the paper, I kind of wasn't interested in it anymore. I was like, okay, which was great. I was kind of fairly productive at Northeastern, and I bounced around to a lot of material systems, which gave me somewhat expertise in a lot of materials. I did biomaterials, I did metals, I did carbon-based materials. I applied it to energy applications, you know, environmental applications, health and medicine. You see where this is going now that I run a material science journal, but it was actually a struggle for funding when I was an academic. So I couldn't, you know, if I applied to different programs, I wasn't an expert in biomedical materials, so I wouldn't get funded. If I applied to structural engineering, I didn't have the background in structural engineering, even though I had it, I didn't have the publication background. So it was difficult to get funding, and I was the guy that always just jumped from project to project. In retrospect, I mean, all I have to do, this made me a great collaborator. So if I had my time back, I think I would have collaborated more and kind of pick a field and just got a background in that. I was very happy at the time bouncing around, but you know, this is the stuff when you get older, you look back and said, I could have made it work. So that's kind of what. So I mean, if you're going down the academic route, you have to establish yourself in a certain community, even if your interests are kind of sporadic. So I could have done more. Like I just should have grabbed onto something and stuck to that community. When you're going to physics conferences and chemistry conferences and structural engineering conferences and mechanical engineering conferences, everything's going great. But there's not that repetition that they like to see, and that's ultimately what killed me. Now that being said, I was looking for then Northeastern wasn't going to work. So I wanted out of Northeastern. So I applied for academic positions. I thought I could make it work elsewhere. I actually interviewed at a university, but ultimately I wasn't, they didn't offer me the position. But then it gets you thinking, even if they offered me the position, life gets in the way, right? So then I wanted something more in Boston because my wife works here, I have a child, whatever. So the opportunity arose at Cell Press. I came across it on LinkedIn. They were looking for an editor-in-chief for a to be titled material science journal. I was like, you know what? I really like to write. I mean, at that point, I have 2 textbooks. I wrote a lot of papers, and I had this extensive background in a lot of material systems. I was like, I think I could really do something here, and this could be fun. They wanted to compete with Nature. You go to all these conferences, you meet people. It's like, I like talking about science. I was like, I think I can do this. And I just kind of wrapped my head, what would I like to see in a journal? So I think you had to submit like at least 2 pages description of your journal. And I sent them like 8 to 10 or something. And then I had all these ideas. I interviewed and I was like, I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do this, all these new ideas with a journal. And then they're like, we like your ideas, you're hired. And then I started working there and they're like, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do that. I was like, why not? And it's like, no, that's not how the journals work. You got to learn about. So it was kind of funny. They hired me for all my crazy ideas and then they're like, you can't do any of it. But it was interesting. So that's kind of where I am now. Basically why I'm happy with where I am. I still get, extremely involved in the community. I'm still talking about science and learning about science. So this problem solver, I'm not really working on the problems right now, but I still exposed to all that and I still get to jump around. I go to more conferences now and talk to more people than I ever did before. So I think it was the right move. I think I'm good. I've only been doing it for 2.5 years, but I think I'm better at this role than what I was as an assistant professor. So I think I can really contribute to the community. So like I said, sometimes, life gets in the way sometimes, but then also life offers you opportunity and you find the right path. I don't think I could have done the job I'm doing now without having that experience as an assistant professor. So, it ended up working out. So yeah, so I think, we can, yeah, I don't know if anything else up to this point, because now we're rolling into my current position.
No, that's very, very great introduction. I'm just wondering, what do you see, where do you see yourself in the future in 5-10 years? Any more exciting ideas?
Yeah, lots. I mean, so it depends what we want to talk about. So obviously I like Cell Press. If you're looking at the publishing industry, there's obviously major changes coming up. I think there's a few questions later down about open access and things like that. I mean, we are a traditional subscription-based journal. So it's a very, I don't know if it's a great time to launch that or a bad time, but we are going to adapt. So we are, on the short-term period, we are going to expand the Cell Press physical science portfolio. So I'm now editor-in-chief of Just Matter, but we want to spin off daughter journals, maybe biomatter, computational matter, something like that, kind of fill out our portfolio. So I would be kind of the strategic guy ahead of all the matter journals. But we also want to branch out and kind of do other things. We don't really know what those are yet. We're going to wait to see what the community kind of dictates. So we want to build a community. So maybe, a preprint kind of offering. There's no really established, like archive and chem archive. There's nothing really established for the materials community. I don't know if it'd be a traditional like archive type preprint because there's different models being proposed for open access. So we want to be innovative in the publishing space. And I know Cell Press is a strong brand and our parent company, Elsevier, is the biggest in the world. So whatever the community, whatever those models change, whether, subscription dies or OA or something, I think we will survive through it. And, all our strategic talks. We want to be leaders and innovators and all that kind of space. So I like the idea of it because, being in control now on this kind of creative end, what would benefit the community and have input into that is fairly exciting. So I still see in 5 to 10 years being probably less of an editorial role. I'll step away from that, not handling papers on a day-to-day basis, but still being involved very much in, I hesitate to even say publishing, because publishing you envision more science communication, right? But it's not really about the hard copy journals anymore. So yeah, so probably still, some sort of dealing with science, hanging around smart people.
Sounds great. Chen, you're muted, I think.
Okay, so since you mentioned that you really like writing, in your real time, what kind of books do you like to read? Is any your favorite writers or who influence you?
I mean, my favorite author was Steven King, so the horror writer, and he has a great book on writing that actually gives tips on how to write novels, which is completely different than scientific writing. But I always go back to like your research papers, your dissertation, a book is still storytelling, right? So you got to get the story across to people. And aside, I keep saying that aside from even writing, I like movies a lot as well, particularly like the Avengers, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Lord of the Rings, big epics, right? That have kind of a universe behind them. And that's kind of what you're doing when you're doing your own research. You're building an extended universe. Each paper is like a movie. It's it's like a story, and you kind of have to put the connections in there yourself. So I always envision like I could pull out the connections of my papers, but that has to come forward. I also like Stephen King because he's not really a technical writer. It's not like you're writing really deep literature. It's he has his own style. It's always not the best, and I feel that comes across. I write a lot of editorials. I try to be a little bit humorous. I wouldn't say I'm the best writer, most technical writer. I probably have a lot of grammatical errors, but it's like music, right? You have your own style and you get your message across. And as long as people understand what you're trying to do, then it's working, right? So I could talk about writing a lot, but it's basically it's an important aspect of any researcher to be able to communicate the story. So, and the more you read, more whatever you're into, you can kind of adapt that. It doesn't have to be, Marvel cinema or Stephen King. It's whatever you're into, right? Rom-coms, go for it. It's like,
yeah. I mean, personally, I really like your editorial stuffs, like written at each issue in the journal. Yeah, it reads very well, and I noticed that you really like using short sentence, more like oral way. Like, is that your personal writing style? Like you don't do this redundant long sentence that typically appear in all the
no, I mean, I mean, it is, and that's very much you try because you don't want those run-on sentences. My editorials, now if you read my research papers, I do have run-on sentences because sometimes you can avoid that when you're just typing a method section or something. But for my editorials, if you want to make a point, then they're crafted very carefully, so I can kind of get them in and what I say. So it's more conversational, I think. I always kind of read them out to myself. It doesn't make sense if I was speaking to somebody, right? Yeah.
All right. So maybe one last question about like your personal stuff. So, are you getting better paid for being an editorial than being professor?
Yes, I currently get slightly higher, not a lot.
Okay.
I got a better deal with Cell Press than I was doing as an assistant professor at Northeastern. For now, just if you wanted to get into publishing, I mean, I jumped from assistant professor to editor-in-chief.
Okay, so that's kind of
it's kind of so, but my scientific editors, my associate editors, it's comparable. It's comparable to a starting professor assistant. So if you wanted to go that route.
All right. So second part, let's getting to know you about your job. So can you describe a typical day in your life how your day for being a top journal editor?
Yeah.
What is that like? When you're getting up, you have to open up email, like thousands of submissions jumping and.
Well, we're not at thousands yet. I mean, just before, so there's a few slides, and I just want to get through the where we are at Cell Press, and that kind of makes sense and more. So just, I guess next, these will be quick, even though I lifted these from another presentation. So Cell Press, just go to the next slide. So Cell Press has a long history. The next slide, please. There you go. So been around for about 50 years, 26 primary research journals. I think we're about 30 now. We just got into the physical science space. So 2016, I think it's here. Yeah, launched July 2016 was Chem. So Rob Eagling is running that. He's my manager now, so I can only say nice things about him if it gets back to him. He's great. So he came from Royal Society of Chemistry. If you want to go to the next slide, then the next after Chem was Jewel. So Philip, he came from, where did he come from? He came from EES, Energy and Environmental Science as well, high impact energy journal. So Jewel's been doing very great. And then the next one, I believe we also launched One Earth is the next slide, the same. And that is Lewis. He's the ASC, his name is not here, but he came from Nature. And then, so all these guys that are editor-in-chiefs of these journals have publishing backgrounds and have been doing it for years. And then they hired me for Matter, who has none of this. I mean, I came from, so they took a risk with me, but now it's Matter. So those are our 4 flagship titles. One Earth is a little bit different because they do a little bit more policy and a little bit more environmental stuff. So really from hardcore physical science, it's Chem, Jewel, and Matter. And I think that's, yeah. And then just my team is the next slide, I believe. You can skip, go ahead 2. There you go. So these are basically the team members I have. So Stacy, King, and Jin Kai. The 4 of us are the editorial board. So everything that comes in is handled by one of us. Aside from that, we reach out again to the editorial teams of Chem and Jewel significantly. So when we were in office, basically we all sat in a little cluster, and you could just tap someone on the shoulder and talk. Now it's more organized Zoom meetings, which kind of sucks, but that's okay. And we also have an advisory board. They don't handle the papers, but we have basically 80 members right now on our board. So depending what comes in, we can reach out to them for their expert opinions. And most people on the advisory board, they'll respond within like 24 hours if we ask them about a paper. It's only like kind of look at the abstract and the key findings and does this make sense, or stuff like editorial decisions still come through the 4 of us. So in terms of day to day, it's basically exactly what you expected. Whenever I start my day, I open up the email and I open up the editorial management system. And the priority is always the new papers. So we are getting right now 5 to 10 a day. That's about our submission rate. More on the weekends. So again, we are doing everything by team. So we have regular editorial meetings. So the first thing I'll do is open the email, see the new papers, start reading the papers, and start making notes on the papers. We have a shared OneNote document where we put in our comments. And basically, every second day, we have an editorial meeting and we clear the board of what we read and we make the decisions. So we either reject outright, in which case you get a very sad email from us, or we send it out for peer review. If it's going out for peer review, I assign it to the associate editor. They will handle the peer review. And then the other option is we will transfer it to one of our sister journals. If it's going to be transferred, depending on the transfer, we might have to reach out to that journal, or we'll just transfer it and they do it blindly. So once we get through the papers, basically whatever I'm handling for peer review is the next step. Again, the papers are always a priority. We want to flip those papers within 2-3 days. Not these slides yet. I might skip these, but the papers are the priority. So we do that. Basically get through all the papers, and once that's done, I can look at the other stuff. And the other stuff is basically branding and marketing and getting the name of the journal out there. So when travel was allowed, that'd be preparations for conferences. We sponsor symposia, we host symposia. We also do a lot of marketing campaigns. If you get emails from us, we got to set those up. Which papers are we going to highlight? And this is a lot of meetings and interactions with the other journals, because there's a lot of joint campaigns and things like that. And then, yeah, as this is happening, peer reviews and papers are still being submitted. So between Zoom meetings, you handle all that kind of stuff. So it's basically handling the science is the main thing. And then between the gaps, when you get through the papers, it's branding and marketing the journal and trying to strategically step ahead. What's coming up in the next 6 months that we can highlight? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then aside from all that, then it's always brainstorming new ideas for new journals and expanding our ecosystem. So there's a lot of little tie-ins. I have regular meetings with marketing, with sales. We also have to sell the journal. We have EIC meetings for all the journals in Cell Press. We have kind of training sessions and everything. So it's very, and then, there used to be a lot of travel. So about twice a month, I'd always hit a conference or go somewhere for site visit. So it's a very, very busy. Usually it's, that's why sometimes you'll be handling papers and peer review on the weekends or reading stuff. We try not to fall behind. Again, my team is set up that the priority is the papers. So get the decisions to the authors. Marketing stuff and conferences, that suffers to the papers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because ultimately we're a journal, and that's our priority.
So typically, how long it will take for you and your auditor team to make the decision? Either you reject it or you send it to peer review.
If it's going to be rejected, the longest decision is we'll either reject or peer review in 2-3 days.
Okay.
It depends. The absolute worst time to submit to us is a Friday. Because we try not to do much formal work over the weekend unless we have to. Yeah. So then we won't see it till Monday, and we'll make the decision on Tuesday. You know what I mean? Yeah. But if you submit Monday or Tuesday, within 24 or 48 hours, you'll get a decision.
Wow, that's very efficient.
What slows it down sometimes is transfers, because we reach out to the other journals, and there's just another step in that process. Like we have to send it to another editor to have a look. Would you guys be interested? They take a day or two and then get back to us. So then it could take 4 or 5 days. Usually we're pretty selective of what we do that with. So if we do reach out and it does take 4 or 5 days, then typically they'll recommend transfer, which we think is usually better for the paper. It's a better, it's a better fit. But a lot of times that's when the authors, they didn't want to, they submitted to Matter, they want to publish in Matter. If we recommend transfer, they'll take it elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, but we're trying. We try to make the best journal for each paper.
Okay. Yeah. So, what do you like and dislike the most about the editorial job?
I mean, right now, I still like reading the science, and I like, I like the scope of what we're handling. Every paper is different. Everything is, coming in. So that's still very enjoyable to me, and discussing it. And the best part about it was the travel. So whether it's a conference or one-on-one meetings with people, I just, not only just what are you working on, but you get the insight of how the lab works or what the university life is like. So, I mean, I was traveling to Europe and China, and, you go out to dinners and lunches and you just talk, you're talking science to people, which is a very nerdy thing to do, but it's cool, right? That's what I'm into. That's why I took the job. So that's what I'm doing right now. So that was the best part about it for sure. Just dealing with the community, and kind of the more you're doing it, people recognize you, you make new friends. You know what I mean? It's very, even though it's global, it's a very small community in a sense that people start knowing it. You know what I mean? So it was good. It was interesting to, and what people are doing, and hopefully make connections too. You go out for lunches with somebody and you bring somebody else, and you guys should write a proposal together. Things like that. The worst part about it is just I mean, you're the gatekeeper, right? You have to make the decision. You have to reject people. You have to reject people after peer review. You have to bug people to submit peer reviews. So at very, sometimes I feel like not like a babysitter, but very much, administratively, I know professors are busy. I was a professor, right? And then you bug them. It's like, your peer review is 3 days late. It's like, are you going to send that in? And then they don't, and then you got to remind them again, or there's deadlines and rejections and rebuttals and stuff like that. So the very administrative part, when things don't really go the way, but it's the name of the game. I don't like doing it, but you have to, right? I'd love to accept every paper, but then we'd be publishing 300 papers a month.
Okay.
Right.
So yeah, so if some reviewers they did not respond in time, how do you guys deal with that? Like just find another reviewer, or
It depends how late they are. So we
Okay.
try to do the reviews quick turnaround, 2-3 weeks.
Yeah.
You can basically add another week onto that, and we don't really,
Mm-hmm.
we want it quickly, but if it turns into 3-4 weeks, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you're approaching 5-6 weeks and you're non-responsive,
Mm-hmm.
you get back to some people and they're like, oh yeah, I'll do that next week. Sorry, it's midterm break. I was traveling with it, we'll do, as long as you're responsive, it's fine. But yeah, if you're non-responsive, we'll basically cancel you. You'll get an email that your review is no longer needed, and we'll invite other people, just to try to turn it around. If we get around the month mark and like no reviews are coming in, we get very antsy. It's like, we're doing a horrible job. Invite more people. Invite more people. We want to turn that around pretty quick.
All right.
So,
yeah, from your story, it sounds like the editorial job is quite attractive also for many young, fresh graduate students. So if they are trying to apply for similar job in the scientific publication industry, so what kind of skills do you think they should be prepared for applying this job?
I mean, we know who we like in the interviews. Because everyone's resumes, it depends, right? So just because you wrote a bunch of papers, the job is very much marketing and discussing and building relationships. So even though obviously we want depth, we want to show that you're like a scholar, because you got to have the background, and but most people who apply for the position, if they're got a PhD and you have the necessary publications and stuff, you tick those boxes. So it's very much, how excited are you about work that's not in your field? How much can you talk about work that's not really up your expertise, and at least understand it quickly, and what are the salient points? Could you carry a conversation out to dinner with somebody and make them like you? Right?
Yeah.
So it's very, I hesitate to say, it's a hospitality position, right? And we are servicing the authors, and we have to be likable, otherwise they don't want to deal with you. And the one thing we want to bring that across, I think there's a question down the line about my use of social media, right? So I tweet a lot. I want my face out there. I want people to, matter is not just you're submitting to a black box and you'll get rejected, accepted. You are submitting to me. I will take it seriously because I take the job seriously. And then we will give your paper or your submission due diligence. You know what I mean? And with that though comes also, it's on me. So there's pros and cons. So I have to handle it with due diligence, and then I have to stand by my decisions because I can't hide behind the black box. So there's pros and cons to that, but it's very much, we want to be transparent about it. And so, put the people first. That's, it shouldn't really, these journals, it's not a publication anymore. It's more of a community thing, right? Like no one has a stack of printed journals in your house. I do. But that's because I get them for free. But it's more, who's on the board, who are you publishing with, who's going to promote it on social media, WeChat groups and all that. It's all entangled, and it's not so much, you're not going to a library and pulling out a physical copy of a journal, right? So in order to do that well, you have to put faces to the journal. I think that's my strategy, at least.
So what I'm hearing is, you're really looking for someone who has a basic foundation in science, but the key is to be good at communications and people relationships.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You want to be able to reject people for their papers and still everyone feel good about it, that it was the right decision, not a harsh rejection, that it wasn't a great fit. You know what I mean?
And if, I were a PhD candidate right now thinking about going to publishing, and I wanted to get your advice on kind of figuring out if it's the right job for me, how do I do a self-assessment and figure out if, I'm going to be happy with the job or not, regardless of if I'm going to get the job or not?
I think the most consistent people, and this is not just the people I hired for Matter, but across Cell Press, they just, not that they didn't like academia, like they didn't envision themselves being the hands-on like bench scientist or lab scientist, or they didn't enjoy that part of it. They weren't, putting together whether it's doing the math or mixing the chemicals or whatever. That's not where the enjoyment came. The enjoyment came from the results, right? And not necessarily of you producing those results, just reading about the results and learning new things. So if that's where the enjoyment comes, that's where people go to editorial, because you're still on cutting edge, right? We get to look at results and papers first thing before, like, we say, well, this is really exciting. When a super exciting paper comes in, it's like, we have to get this out quick. And then you're like super motivated to find peer reviewers. And, we have a press team. When super cool stuff comes in, we go to the press team and like, this has to be in the New York Times. You know what I mean? So it's that enthusiasm and excitement about, science, which is why a lot of people got into grad school, right? Because you're at that level where you understand everything, but at some point in your career, you got less enthusiasm for the academic, the actual nitty gritty, the daily grind of, you're not motivated to go into a lab and sit there for 8 hours and look at a microscope. You know what I mean? You just want to get through, yeah. So it's definitely more that side of things, the immediacy, and everything's different, right? Because it's paper by paper. It's not even like you're not committed for a 4-year project or something. So yeah, that seems to be what's consistent. It's very quick moving. And people have used it to leverage kind of, you do an editorial position for a few years. I mean, an editor at Joule recently left and he took a job in a startup for batteries. And because, he was an editor for Joule, he knew the cutting edge battery stuff. That's also what he did his PhD in, so he's qualified. But you could also do the editorial stuff for a while as a leapfrog into another. You're probably cutting ties with academic. You're probably not going to jump back into a professor position, but definitely, consulting or drug companies or something more technology driven. You're still keeping your credentials with the cutting edge, right?
All right, you just mentioned that you really likes to use Twitter to kind of promote yourself and also the Matter. And it looks like Matter is kind of, from my personal point, it's much better in terms of the promoting research on both traditional media and the new social media. So how do you came up with those ideas? Like, how do you manage this research promotion through all this?
So I'm willing to try new stuff, and I'm a firm believer in, the social media, but I want to drive it. So I'm always looking for new ideas. I guess a lot of the editors and stuff are a little bit older. I'm not that old, but they don't really understand it. Even, I'm not Cell, our flagship journal, Cell.
Okay.
Right? They only tweet. They have like 30,000 followers on Twitter, or maybe more, but they only tweet the new papers when the new issue comes out on Wednesday, and then they'll tweet 20 tweets in a row about all the new content in Cell, and that's it for the month, right? So if you missed it, like you know what I mean? That's not great. So tweet one per day for the whole month, or do something. And they don't, you got to use the right hashtags, and you got to do all that stuff. I think content and that stuff beyond the journal, marketing, like we do a top 10 list every month. I'm doing that. Just throwing that out there, and it promotes, if your paper is the second most downloaded every month, that's a good accomplishment. It means nothing really, but it's still, you should be recognized because your paper was, number 2. We want to do more videos. We want to do more media to kind of promote everything. Unfortunately, like, I don't have the time to do everything. My editors don't have the time. So we try to get input from the community and stuff, what they'd like to do. Twitter is very good. WeChat's very good. Like, we have a Facebook thing. Nobody uses Facebook for science, so that we put stuff on Facebook just because we do it, but like, there's no return. I wish I knew what the return. I think in 2021, we're going to have a lot more video content, because Zoom is very easy. You hit record and then you can put it out there. So I know YouTube would be great for that for us. In China, I've heard, what is it, Bilibili? We could start doing stuff. And then, yeah, I mean, you laugh, and I think Billy, from what I've heard, is more for like younger community, right?
Yes, definitely.
But if we start branding ourselves to the younger community, when they become researchers and ultimately older, it's marketing to your future generation,
Yeah,
right?
that's a
So
good idea. Yeah.
we want them to know about matter, cell press, and science, and it's all tied together, and that makes us stronger as a brand, right? And then we grow, and then the 5 to 10 year plan, again, we're growing beyond just a publication, and it's more about science communication. So that's where I want to embrace that and be at the forefront of that. I wish I knew the answer, like what would be really exciting, because I'd be doing it. But right now we're just growing our base on Twitter and WeChat and stuff, and things will evolve from it, I think.
Yeah.
Have you considered TikTok? That's where young people are.
I have a TikTok account. There is a few TikTok videos from Matter.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You can find me on TikTok. But yeah, and we're trying. I'm open for anything, and if it gains traction, like, we'll do it. But I mean, that, like I said, that stuff takes time and effort. Our marketing team is up for some stuff, but it's subject to approval, and a lot of times it's stopped. You know what I mean? So I got to go rogue sometimes and just do it. But we'll see. If you're not pushing the boundaries, and your managers should be mad at you every now and then. That's my yeah.
All right. So another question is, how are the journals ensuring inclusiveness in reviewing submissions? For example, how to balance between like recurring authors from prestigious institutes versus like less known young academics? Like,
yeah. So I mean, it's a balance, right? So
yeah,
we have no agenda in terms of, we try to not look at the authors at first. We'll look at the title, we'll read the abstract, but unfortunately on the cover page, the authors are listed. It's one of the first things you see. So there's that implicit bias there.
Yeah.
The big guys or girls, but the big guys, we'll call them. Obviously they help the journal immensely. Because if you're getting the best researchers in the world to publish in yours, you get more recognition immediately. I am a huge proponent of younger faculty, younger PIs. I like to use a sports analogy, right? Because the big guys are your Hall of Famers, but you're only going to get a season or two out of them, right? But if you curate your draft picks and your rookies, then you'll have success for years to come, right? So but there's a risk there because they're not established. So you give them a chance. Some are hits, some are not hits, and they all have to meet the same quality. I mean, I'm after rejecting some big guys because they send us crap, and they think their name will just get it through, and then you have to reject them, which kind of sucks, because you might, depending on who they are, they take offense to that because I'm such and such and I'm published in Science and Nature, and it's like, well, this paper's crap. But yeah, so we try to let the science speak for itself. But that being said, I'm not going to lie. I mean, if you're a big established guy coming from MIT or something, you do get a little bit nicer, handling from us. And once we're established, I'd like to think we'll kind of not do that anymore. But we also have to play the games to kind of get the big guys so we can market and that we're for real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's win-win. And that's why one of the reasons we try to do things quickly. So they'll come to us instead of Nature, because Nature takes a year, but if you come to us, we'll get it online in 3 months. So it's a balance. That's all. I mean, it's all, you don't want to do too much. It's the same with even global distribution. Over half, about 60% of all our submissions right now do come from China. So we could, depending on what comes in on a particular month, almost all the papers could be from China groups, which is neither good nor bad. But if you start publishing full issues from just China, it ostracizes other groups. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sometimes, if it comes in from Europe, we kind of lower the bar a little bit because we want more European papers. You know what I mean? And maybe if it's coming from China, the bar is raised a little bit because we want a little bit less Chinese papers. And it's, like I said, it's a balancing act to get the best representation And at the end of the day, I think when we were discussing earlier, I could have whole issues full of perovskite papers. And from an impact factor point of view, that might work because perovskite, or maybe MOFs, right?
Yeah.
Right. But that doesn't, you want something that's representative of the community you're trying to serve. And it goes back to making the people connections, because I don't want matter to become the MOF journal. And then you go to conferences and they're like, you only publish MOFs. Why am I even going to consider you? And ultimately you want everybody reading everything. But you know, that again, that, you know, you try. So going back to the original, I mean, we definitely consider young PIs, but like it's more of a challenge for sure from those PIs. But there's definitely there's no like, you can be first year, it could be your first paper, send it to us. We'll look at it and it gets just as much consideration as any other paper. Nobody gets rejected on the fact that, you know, we don't like this school or you're not established enough. It definitely gets consideration. And I think I'm after backing a few that I'll, you know, let's give them a chance, right? They come from a good group, and this is decent work, but you know, maybe on another month we reject it, but now let's send it out for peer review and see what happens.
It sounds really like a VC founding manager. Okay, so how do you guys choose reviewers, like to ensure like they are the most qualified reviewers?
That is probably the most difficult part of the process, to get the right set of reviewers. So obviously, I mean, yeah, I've looked at more Google Scholar profiles and faculty websites, and you kind of got to trust the numbers and the historical publication records and knowing people in the community. That's right. So if we know people or people on our advisory board, like we'll reach out to them and we need reviewers in this area. We don't like to have the advisory board review everything. They do a couple, maybe a year, but otherwise they'll get fatigued from the journal, right? Yeah. So we will just, you know, we just reach out. It's the hardest part. You don't know, right? So sometimes you're picking reviewers based on, it's like, man, this person published a lot and they seem to be, you know, their H-index is great and they come from this prestigious university and stuff. So, and then you invite them to review and then they review it and it's a horrible review, right? And so maybe they're too busy. Maybe they didn't like the paper. You don't know, right? And then, you know, and then you just find out from a friend of a friend that invite this other guy from, you know, a state school or a lesser known university, and they don't have a great publishing record, but you invite them to review, they're on time and their review is fabulous. You know what I mean? And then they make the short list. So we keep a list of people we know in certain subject areas. People reach out all the time and like, I would like to review. We'll definitely give them a shot. I mean, every paper that comes in that we send out for review needs 3 or 4 reviewers. So if you will get something invited from us if you reach out and say, I would like to review for Matter. And then it depends on just building that relationship. If the review comes in and you're on time and it's good, we will use you again and again. And if you're a reviewer from us and then you submit to us, we know your name. It's more likely, you know what I mean? It's kind of a feedback process. It's not like, you know, we only send out, it's a good way to, you know, if you reviewed well for us, we're probably going to send out your paper for review as well, because we know the quality is high. You know what I mean? We get to know you a little bit better. So,
because from my personal experience, since we have one submission experience to Matter, and the reviewers looks very qualified. I mean, at least from my opinion, they're really in this field, and the questions they raised are really related to the research. Not, I mean, to be honest, we also have some submission experience to some other journals. Sometimes the reviewers' comments came back and they ask some unrelated questions, which looks not very professional. But yeah, but like from Matter, we have quite a good experience, I would say.
Yeah, no, and that's what we try, right? But I mean, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes we get horrible reviews come in, right? And then you have a choice. I mean, you read the review. Ultimately, I trust the peer review process, but if a bad review comes in, and not necessarily bad, they're not saying reject, but if they say like, you know, here's 3 comments, minor revisions, but the 3 things don't even make sense, you know what I mean? Then that's a bad review to me. And then it depends. Sometimes we won't even send those back to authors, right? And just, you know, because there's no, you know, it doesn't add to the research at all. So it's the worst. I wouldn't say the worst part. It's part of the job, but it's the trickiest part of the job, finding the right peer review process. people. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe we can talk a bit more about publishing, but kind of in the aspect of giving advice to some of our listeners here who are, attempting to publish. And we've got a lot of questions submitted from the audience asking, what are the criteria, what are the landmines to avoid when submitting a paper,
Yeah.
and what are your advice on writing a good abstract, good title, whether they should submit when they have some new results or wait for longer for to prepare for a bigger paper, stuff like this. Any advice to the audience?
Yeah, I think just go, I'll do one thing first, and we won't have to go slide by slide, but just slide, it's 37, I think. It's a little comic. There you go. So we wrote a little editorial, I think it was last January, it actually came out. These are the 4 major reasons we reject. So this is what we came up with. We kept getting the same kind of papers over and over and over. And it's like the reasons that we rejected them were always in these categories. And this is kind of our shorthand that we now use as an editorial team, that we can just say we're rejecting it because it's a substitution paper. So the 4 of them, I mean, and this doesn't make it bad science. This is from us trying to establish ourselves as like the top in the field. So a lot of these papers that we reject, and it's just the name of the game, is great science. And almost necessary science, because you need kind of the supporting papers to flush out all the details of whatever subject area you're in. Anyway, so what we like to say, these are the 4 major rejections. So just assess your own paper, and if it can kind of be classified in one of these, you might want to tweak it a little bit, or do your pitch a little bit better, put it in the cover letter, and try to explain why it doesn't fit. So substitution is basically you're doing it doesn't have the novelty we're looking for, because you're basically just taking something that's been done before and substituting the system. So one of the things I like to say about that is, like, we get so many papers that are just repeats of graphene work. I mean, graphene is one of the materials that was graphene is great, but it was a superstar, rediscovered with the Scotch tape in 2004. And then there was the paper that, did the thermal conductivity of graphene and the electrical conductivity of graphene. And then there's, the strength of graphene and the stiffness, you know what I mean? And those papers are great. And they went to Science and Nature because it was the first time anyone has ever done that on a 2D material. And now 2D materials that are all in the literature are like Maxines. And we get papers that are doing the thermal conductivity of Maxine and the electrical conductivity, and they're doing the exact same work. And it's you could just take the title, and instead of graphene, it's Maxine. So you're not doing anything different. So that's, so substitution. So we find something that's been done in the past. That's a lot of this stuff is in like battery fields where they're just using a different layer. You know what I mean? And they're just substituting a different metal as an anode or a cathode or something. But it's been shown, and so it's like, okay, there's nothing really groundbreaking here. Could be great work. I'm not saying it's bad work, but we'll just say we found another paper. This is a substitution, so we get rejected. Incremental is similar. You're just adding something on top of something that's been done. So you're taking, something like a new dopant, right? And you're taking a system that's been looked at before, and now you dope it with something. Or you're looking at a composite material and you're adding a different layer. So obviously it's pushing the field forward. It could be great work, but you don't have that novelty we're looking for. A plus B should be self-explanatory. You're just taking 2 things. We see a lot of stuff with magnets. You put magnetic nanoparticles in there. Yeah. Adding magnetic nanoparticles is a frequent offender. Basically, obviously, if you're going to put something magnetic in there, it's going to be magnetically controlled. That doesn't tell me anything. A plus B equals A plus B. What you want to show is A plus B, like there's an amplifying effect. You add A and B together and you get A squared. You know what I mean? You add something new to the system, not just you're combining 2 effects. And then the last one is just super niche. The super niche one is just, could be great work. But you're looking at, these are kind of the worst ones sometimes, because we just look at it and there's only going to be 6 groups in the world that are interested. Right? So even if it's a super hit, you're talking like 10 citations. Science could be great, but you need specialized equipment and a specialized space. you know, and you're in some weird condensed matter physics area or something. And it's just, it doesn't have that broad appeal we're looking for. So that's the, so those are our most frequent rejections. And it, like I said, they constitute very good papers. Sometimes we'll read it and all the editors will be like, this work is really nice. It ticks all the boxes, has like, you know, theoretical understanding, great experimental work, decent application, but it's just like, you know, lots of people would have thought of it. So it's not for us. We're looking for novelty, innovation, something that has broad appeal. If it's battery work, we look at stuff in batteries and like, would this appeal to somebody who's not working in batteries? And maybe they're doing some other catalysis, some other thing that, you know, it has appeal across disciplines. But that's, like I said, I have to stress that doesn't make it bad science, doesn't make it bad research. It's just not for us. So, you know, so it's some of the rejections. So the story for us, and this is what has to go in your title. Titles are a little bit different. We can go back there, but the abstract, you have to have a sentence that says what your contribution is, what the novelty is, what the innovation is. In this paper, we show XYZ for the first time. You don't necessarily have to say for the first time, but make it explicit what the new, like the newness is. I mean, basically in the abstract, one sentence, what's the problem? And then how you solved it. That's, you know what I mean? That's how it should be teed up. Or what's the area and what's your contribution? Or, you know, what's the challenge, and, you know, you brought in this new technique or something. Those two things should be in there, and filling those two things, you know, a background sentence and some details of what you did. But those two things have to be in there. What, you know, who's going to be interested in this and why, right? It all depends on how you frame it. Titles are a balancing act, because it has to be broad enough to cover, you know, so it garners lots of interest, but yet you want to be specific enough to tell us what it did. You know what I mean? So in terms of titles, shorter is better. There's actually been tons of studies showing that short titles are cited more for whatever reason, but you also have to have enough explicit adjectives in there to say what the study was. So usually come up with like 10 titles, show them to different people. The right one usually emerges. Do not just try to do a shorter abstract version of the title. We're going to get a little bit more critical with our titles going forward, just because we want to kind of push the boundaries of those. But yeah, that's critical. I think there's also like figures. I mean, everything else in the paper goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning, storytelling. It should all be consistent in this story. So your introduction, your methods, your conclusions, think of it as one, like a movie. All the figures are scenes in the movie. And if there's one that looks out of place, it's not needed. If it slows down the plot, it's not needed. It should all be consistent and build upon each other for, you know, the great resolution at the end. It takes some time, but you should set it out that, like, you know, it depends how you're formatting your manuscripts, if the figures are in there or at the end or something, but it should all flow together at the end. I used to write my papers and how I read them, you know, everybody reads the papers from start to finish, should. And there should be, you know, a nice cohesiveness to it. So if you start off with the method section and then write the discussion and go back and do the introduction, when you finish your draft, make sure you read it and edit from start to finish to make it all one cohesive story. It makes it better to read. You know a good paper when you read it. I do. I mean, you know, it doesn't even have to be in your area of science, but, you know, in the introduction, you're like, yeah, this is a critical area to solve and do research in. It's like, they really sold it. And then you get to the results. It's like, oh, this is what they did. When you have to sit down and read the paper, and sometimes it's like, I don't even know what they're trying to do here. and then sometimes the science is great and it's just lost because it's not written well. And ultimately, that's, you know, we're publishing papers. It has to be written well in order to communicate what you did, right? So yeah, that's my spiel on that.
Right. So I think you mentioned about like this novelties of the paper and the research results. But how do you think about balancing the novel results to publish them immediately, or like wait for a couple of longer time to like finish this complete set of
I mean,
investigation?
yeah, I'm a as long as you have enough evidence to support whatever you're claiming.
Okay.
For me, it doesn't have to be complete. We want stuff out more quickly, as long as the novelty is there. I mean, if you're claiming there's a new material, you have to have enough evidence that it's there, right? You can't just yeah. A lot of the stuff, if we get battery papers and they do, oh, this is stable for like 50 cycles. It's like, that's not enough. You have to show stability for more, you know what I mean? So you can't flip it that quick. There has to be enough support. But no, you could always ask for more stuff. I mean, that's people get tied up in the peer reviews where you need more support, more revisions, more support, more, and you can always, that's what science is, and that's what the papers that follow up do. The substitution work and the incremental work and all the stuff that we reject papers for. But if the idea is new, I'm a proponent of getting it out quickly, right? And then that, you trust the peer review process. Are the reviewers satisfied? Are you satisfied that there's enough here to warrant it? These science and nature papers that we kind of discussed that kind of have 50 pages of supplementary information, I don't necessarily think that's the right way of doing it, because those 50 pages are like, that's other papers that should be out there. Nobody looks at the SI unless it's really, you know what I mean? Yep. The whole process and the industry could be a lot quicker if you just go with the ideas and support those ideas. We've seen that this year with COVID. There's so many COVID related papers and the community worked very quickly on it. It's really a success story for science to have the vaccines. And there's a lot of factors in that, and there's good and bad things with putting stuff on the preprint servers very quickly, and then other scientists can use that and build upon that. So again, it comes down to balance, because you don't want to have false negative results. If you do stuff too quickly, that results in retractions. But you want to get the stuff out there as quick as possible. And I think that's the speed, with open access and preprints and everything, we should go for a little bit more speed than what we've been used to, and because that just keeps everyone at the forefront and pushes the community faster. All right.
Cool. I feel like we're running out of time, and I really wanted you to kind of have direct conversation with the audience for at least 5 to 10 minutes. So maybe
I have no place to go. It's so yeah.
So maybe we have like 2 more areas to discuss, and you can pick which is more important. One is, I know you mentioned a bit about your opinion on the future of publishing in terms of open access, or even getting out of the traditional format of publishing, but more like publishing through certain platforms.
Yep.
And then the other question we wanted to get advice from you is kind of general life advice to young researchers who are kind of in between, pursuing their passion, but having to face pragmatic matters like getting a position, getting enough money to start a family.
No.
So yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on these 2 questions before we hand over to the audience.
Sure. For open access, there's 2 things that are, I guess, in publishing models. The subscription model is going to die. It doesn't serve anybody anymore. There's basically too many journals. That's what happened. You can't have a library sustain subscriptions to everybody. It's like having 1,000 TV channels, right? So you have to go with either selective, and then that doesn't benefit anybody, or you have to go and pirate everything, which sucks. But the current OA model with APCs, I mean, Nature just announced they're going for a model that is going to be $10,000 a paper. And Nature Communications, and we charge current charge around $5,500 American for open access. That's not I don't think that model is going to live on either, because that's not equitable across. If you're just starting out, you're not going to be able to afford $10,000 to get published, and that'll just increase the gap between the successful labs that have piles of money, and then people starting up that just, some people will be successful. It's like the 1%ers in the economy, right? But that's not great for science. So there's going to be some other model developed. I wish I knew what it was, because we make a lot of money at Cell Press. But I think within the next 5-10 years, there's going to be something else that's going to serve the community. We're subscription based. We're not committed to subscription based. It's just that's what works for us right now. We go in our strategic kind of meetings and interest in OA is going up and interest in subscription base is going down, they haven't crossed yet. And once they do, we'll adapt, we'll flip. We're not sold to subscription base. It's just that's what works for us right now. So again, it's more like we don't, like I say, we got to get out of this publishing mentality and subscriptions and articles and stuff. And it's more about science communication. What that model consists of in the future, we'll see. In terms of academics and like younger, I mean, if you're going the academic route, it's really, don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be unhappy. I kind of did that myself, not a little bit. I definitely, in hindsight, you don't know sometimes. It's a tricky thing, right? But don't drive for impact. Don't put yourself in a work-life balance for academics is horrible. You don't need to be working, 100-hour weeks or anything like that. So any institution that kind of requires that shouldn't. And I think if that goes across the community, that there's these, that becomes the new normal, then all this drive for publications and impact factors and everything will just kind of lessen a little bit. And then I think the science will benefit because science isn't supposed to be a competitive game, right? I think there's a lot of funding agencies are too competitive. Getting published with us is too competitive. And it's kind of like, you're just you're making marks on a scoreboard, which, science is meant to be collaborative and, and everyone puts in the same kind of stuff, which is where I think the models are going with like kind of a, open peer review and, open access so everybody can benefit and things like that. So, I mean, if you're going the academic route, that's it. Just don't put yourself in a position that it's too much. If you're not going the academic route, because there's plenty of opportunity, that's not a professorship. I mean, very few people really in the percentages of PhDs and things like that become professors now. Editorial is one route that puts you on the forefront of science, but it's still an academic, you're still dealing with universities and research. I think one of the things we're going is kind of that bridging between industry and academia. And there's plenty of opportunity in that. That's starting to pick up. And I think the next cohort of grad students within the next 5 to 10 years really has to push kind of a new wave of R&D in the world and start more industries that are based on science and not on products. We're trying to get ahead of that. We want to make some more industry ties in terms of research and matter and stuff like that. But you can see kind of the tide turning because there's so much new kind of knowledge base that's getting into the community. So startup companies, entrepreneurial stuff, it's just not going to be, there's going to be more opportunity there than national labs and pharmaceutical companies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. We've interviewed a lot of people for editorial roles. And if you're not going as a professorship, or even if you went for it and you never got a position, it's almost like, oh, woe was me. What can I do with my expertise? And I think it's going to hit critical mass. So there's going to be opportunity there. It's still a good time to be trained and have a PhD. Yeah.
Cool, great. Now, shall we spend some time speaking to the audiences directly? I know some people submitted a couple of questions. I think we covered most of them. They were mostly questions on like how to write a good paper, what mistakes to avoid.
Yep.
Anyone from the audience who have slightly different questions, and like you can be unmuted and speak to Steve directly.
The only thing just before, if anyone, feel free to ask a question, but I just want to say if anyone's out there, if like my job is to interact and assess anybody's questions or papers. So definitely my contact and stuff, I'm on WeChat, I'm on my email. Feel free to reach out to me with a paper, or do you think this is suitable, or any questions about the edit. If you don't want to raise the discussion here in front of everybody, I will get back to you. I mean, I get questions all the time, and I prefer, I welcome that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, please raise your hand if you have a question, and then we'll put you in the panel so you can unmute yourself.
Nice to see a Newfoundlander. Yeah, there's not too many of us in academia. We get around.
Yeah, we saw some people in the attendee. 师博周 promote to panelists.
Hi, Steven. Thank you very much for the talk today. Can anyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Thank you really much for the talk. I thought I expect this talk to be just about the editorial process, but it turns out that it gave us so many information, especially about some reflections about your career path. And that's really interesting for me because you said that in order, because you clearly vision yourself as a problem solving and a tool researcher. And you said that in order to establish in academia, we have to have a strong expertise in one specific field. But here comes my question, because sometimes some researchers are doing multidisciplinary research, and I was wondering how we can balance whether to continue our career in one specific field or try other fields so that we can have multidisciplinary background in order to establish in academia.
Yeah, no, academics are definitely going multidisciplinary. So, I mean, I would encourage anyone who you can't really have that laser focus in a single field. It all depends what you're contributing. So I think most people, when they get into these interdisciplinary groups, you still have some sort of subspecialty, right? And so make that your contribution, and you can definitely kind of partake in different groups. I mean, there's very, very few true interdisciplinary guys or girls, researchers, that have expertise across multiple fields and multiple areas. It's just not the way things are set up. So I think you can still balance having those interdisciplinary interests and connections, but still very much establish yourself as this is your topic area that you have ownership of, because that's what you want to keep pushing in terms of your record. Again, this is more for establishing yourself. Once you get established, then you're free to kind of grow and curate those interdisciplinary connections. The older guys don't have to, the more established guys don't have to worry about it, because in their past career, now they're known. So it's just from my perspective that you should build your own community and, name recognition that it should be like one sentence. Oh, Professor XYZ, oh yeah, he's known for this. And it should be for that thing. And you should have depth in that thing. You can't say, oh, he's known for this and this and this and this, and he's a great interdisciplinary guy. Nobody's going to understand that. So it's kind of like make your CV like an elevator pitch. You have to have that one thing that's yours. And then you can have the interdisciplinary connections, but that one thing is still yours. You know what I mean? That's, again, my opinion.
Thank you. It's like what you showed in your presentation. Like I also consider myself as a tool guy and a problem solving guy. And you said that as a tool guy, you can you can interact with different field. And as you said, still we have to keep a strong background in our expertise in the tool genre. Like even though we try different field, but we still consider ourselves as our best expertise in this tool or problem solving genre.
Yeah. And even the tool guys, I mean, like I said, I was more of a materials mechanician. So the tool development is also, that could be your thing. It doesn't always have to be on a system. You know what I mean? You could be working on algorithms. I don't know your particular case, but it could be, and that's your established thing. So and then you're balancing that. You also want to go, whatever your known thing is where your passion lies. That's the other trick, right? You don't want to say, oh, I'm known for this, but I really hate it. That's just what I wanted to establish myself and be known for. You really want that to be what you're really good at and passionate for. So usually, again, for the top established guys, and it's better in retrospect, like this happens. Oh, I tried these 5 things this one became successful and I got published in Nature. So then I became known for that. It wasn't really planned out ahead, but it could be, you know what I mean? So it's an interesting balance. And again, yeah, grab onto what you're passionate for and try to be known for it, and don't spread yourself too thin. That's the thing.
I see. Thank you very much. Thank you, Steven.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Cool. Next we have Iran.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve, for the very informative and inspiring talk. I actually have a question about the work-life balance. I heard that you mentioned that the academia work-life balance is horrible. So I wonder how the work-life balance for editorial work is compared to industry jobs. Just curious, because I'm a PhD candidate. I don't know what I'm gonna do in 5 years or whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, industry, it really depends on the company you work for. I can't really speak because I know people in drug companies, even pre-COVID, that are putting in, 80-hour weeks, and that's just, but other people I know in the industry are kind of slackers for less, but editorial is not bad. It's ebbs and flows for sure. But I know Cell Press and Elsevier and the full-time editorial teams, I mean, they're very respective of the work-life balance. So obviously we have deadlines. So there's times that when, the journal has to, go to publication and stuff, there could be longer days. But when things die down, there's lots of extended lunches and out for drinks and things like that. There's lots of, I enjoy the travel. And then when you're traveling, it's like going to a conference all the time. So some of those days are really, really busy because I got to give 2 talks, and then you're meeting with people and stuff like that. And then other days, you attend some sessions and you go out for a lunch, and then there's a nice dinner afterwards. So we don't really have a 9 to 5 schedule. I mean, we do in a sense. That's when our meetings are mostly, but there's lots of flexibility because as long as you're handling the papers and the cogs are going, there's good balance. I've been very fortunate. I think Cell Press is very good in terms of how they handle that. I have a young child. I'm spending more time with her now as editor-in-chief, even though I think I have more responsibilities now. But I'm spending a lot more time than I was as an assistant professor. There's just, things can wait. You don't have to check your emails on the weekend. Sometimes you do because there's papers, but that's because I want to. So that's besides the point. So it's nice, So I think that's becoming more important for all employers. And I think it's self-imposed on the academic community. It's not necessarily what needs to happen. It's just the community has gone this way. So in industry, and in particular in editorial, there's more importance on that.
Cool. Just for a follow-up question on the on your answer, I have a question about the traveling. You mentioned that you need to go to many conferences and to socialize with different people. Do you think it's the traveling frequency will be something like a consulting job, or it's more like an academia job, like going to conferences and giving talks? Well, of course, it's pre or after COVID, because now everything is virtual.
It was a bit, my travel, it was a little bit different because we were starting. So we had to get the name out there quickly. So I'd say there was significant travel to conferences, which is pretty much, I mean, if you've been to a conference, it's the same thing. I'm giving talks, I'm attending talks, and then you're hobnobbing with other academics. But the other, aside from the conferences, it was site visits. So that's more like a consulting thing. And the site visits are usually academic institutions, but we also hit national labs. And I visited Samsung, and you go in and you see, if anything, like we did a webinar with Argonne National Labs, and it's more strategic kind of discussions than just research. How can we benefit you guys? How can you guys benefit from us? Type stuff. So it's definitely interesting. It's still science related, but it's definitely less of an academic flair. And we're trying to get outside of that. Cell Press has a lot of contacts with drug companies, pharmaceutical companies. So if you were on the life science side, they hit a lot of hospitals, talk to that kind of researcher. little bit different on materials, but it depends. So it's not strictly, pseudo professors.
Great, thank you. I think, yeah, like your answers are very inspiring, helpful. Yeah, I'll consider editorial as one of my paths in my future career.
Cool. We're always hiring, so I'll let you know. Reach
Cool,
out.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So next could be Yupeng.
Hi, Steven. Thank you so much. Very good talk. Thank you so much. So actually, I got a simple question. Is that because in my field, actually, I study mechanics and also with material science. So in our field, that usually for the journals, that the editorial board, it seems the people there and also the chief editor, usually a voluntary job is like there's no compensation or salary. So that they are professors, and meanwhile they are the chief editor. So that in your case, it seems that you are not a professor anymore, and you just solely work on this. So could you comment on this? Is that so that means you may get some salary or compensation from this? This is a independent job that require you to not to be a professor anymore or something? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm employed by Cell Press, so this is my full-time job now that I'm paid quite well for.
Thank you so much. So I'm just curious about, for the journals, usually traditionally that there's no compensation, there's no salary. So why does Cell Press do this, or is this a new norm to some particular field or something?
No, I wouldn't say it's a new norm. So we are one of the professional editorial titles. I mean, Cell Press, the Nature Group is full-time editorial, and Science, and some of Wiley's titles also. The vast majority, Elsevier journals or any of the journals from the American Society of Mechanical Engineering or Civil Engineering or something, those editors are always ran by faculty.
Right.
I mean, it's basically a question of behind the scenes in those journals, there's still production people and there's still marketing people, but the papers are handled by faculty, whereas we do them with full-time editors. It just gives us more control. So we like to consider ourselves, the higher impact product, which requires editorial control. Now there's pushback on that because that always enters the term of like vanity journals, that we're not really, serving the community in terms of the science. We just want high impact, lots of citations because it's more profitable. But I also think we can, our motivation isn't our careers. Our motivation should be the science. So a lot of times if you're a faculty and you're running a journal, maybe you just want to put it on your CV, you want to make the connections, you know what I mean? You want to make yourself a little bit prestigious in the field. So there could be bias there, whereas essentially we're independent of the people we serve. So there's no bias. I've said it a bunch of times, but there's balance. So I think the society journals are great, the ones that are run by faculty. But I mean, a lot of those editors in chiefs of other journals submit to us and submit to Nature. So they see the value in the full-time editorial stuff. It just separates itself. It's the same product, but it's two different processes, because one you go through independent editorial, the other one you go through your own network of faculty people. There doesn't seem to be a high-end professional editorial ran mechanics journal, which I'm trying to push for at Cell Press, because I know where mechanics and materials people publish, and most of those journals are ran by full-time faculty. So I think the community could benefit from one, but we'll see. 2023 maybe.
Okay, thank you so much. Just one more question is that, so because for the traditional, you mean the society journals, that usually for the editors is sort of an honor, you should be established, and then that you may be invited to be an editors,
Yep.
to be one of the editors. And in your case, it seems that some people just asked that, okay, I may pursue a career in the editorial team. So in my opinion, that maybe that first we should establish ourselves to be a established researcher in our own field, and then we may be invited to be one, or that we are just a blank paper that we can apply ourselves directly. So I think maybe a reputation or a credit should be built first. Is that the case for the independent press, or is there any difference between the two editorial structures? Yeah, thank you.
I mean, there is a bit of a difference. So like my editors have only been editors and only graduated from their PhDs within the past 2 years. Well, sorry, not just their PhD, because one Xinkai is a postdoc, did postdocs. But yes, they're fairly young, whereas the faculty editors could have before they become the editor-in-chief or editor status, they have a lot more experience in the field. I mean, that doesn't mean you can't assess. Editorial is a little bit, you can be trained, right? But having that experience is definitely of value. So the society journals can see value in some works and see trends definitely that a noob can't see. But we are also, it's our full-time job. So on a per paper basis, we can spend a lot more time assessing that and reaching out to other experts and learning. So again, it's a balance. There's definitely benefits in having the full-time faculty as editors and handling the papers. They have that experience, they have the depth of knowledge. They probably qualified to not only handle the paper, but also review the paper. Whereas my team is younger, and definitely we have to reach out to the community a lot more, but we try to do just as good a job, and it'll come with experience, right? We're a new journal, but like there's editors at Nature that have been doing it for 30 years, right? And so they only handle it, and they have the depth and knowledge. So again, there's balance, but there's pros and cons to both systems. And I think there's room for the journals so everybody can, you can choose society, pros and cons. You can choose us, there's pros and cons.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Very helpful. Thank you. And good luck.
Any other questions?
So is there any other questions?
Great.
All right. So if there's no more questions, let's thank our guest speaker, Dr. Steven Cranford again. Thank you very much for being here, sharing your experience of being a professional editor, and also your transition from the academic to the publishing industry. And also thank you very much for sharing these tips for how to write in good papers. And we really wish that, we really hope that the Matter could become one of the most prestigious journal in computer science soon. And
me too.
And we also hope that if you guys, all the audience, if you have very exciting results related to computer science, we really encourage you to submit to Matter to experience very efficient reviewing process and the editorial management process. Yeah, it's very pleasant. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So
thank you guys for the opportunity to speak, and I hope this will be the first of many collaborations with the Martlet Society.
Yeah. And so next. Sorry. Yeah. So our Martlet Society is basically for young generation, young scholars to kind of sharing their thoughts, exchange their ideas, and for either academic or non-academic talks, events. We promote those events for younger generation people to kind of communicate with the archer in this special period. All right. So next talk, we're gonna have Professor Helen Chen from University of Toronto in the Department of Chemistry to give us a very exciting talk coming soon weekend. All right, so see you everyone.
See ya. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Have a good night. Have a great day.
Bye.
Wherever you are.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.